Okay, hello everybody. Good afternoon and welcome back after your lunch. Hopefully, you guys all feel a little more energized after your lunch. I haven't had my lunch yet, so I may be a bit cranky, so forgive me. Great, so welcome to this afternoon's panel session, and today we have a really exciting panel for you. So great. So today, the topic of the panel here is what every person in AR needs to know about haptics. So panel is being moderated by Elizabeth Nguyen. She is a former fellow at the Women in XR Fund. And she is currently, yes, absolutely, and she's currently a junior at Stanford University studying computer science with a focus on immersive technologies and creative writing. She was the past president of Stanford XR, which is a student organization that supports a wide community of artists and developers and has organized XR conferences drawing more than 400 attendees. Within the realm of education, Elizabeth has helped teach and design introduction virtual and augmented reality classes at Stanford and spoken at educator workshops by Unity, Learn, and Girl Genius. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth and our panel that she'll introduce shortly. Thanks, guys. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bharath, for that kind intro. It's so exciting to be here. This is my first AWE, so excited to be here and to have fantastic panelists today. So just want to give space to introduce our amazing experts on stage. So first we have Gijs Den Butter. So Gijs is the co-founder of Sense Glove. So the company was born out of a thesis project to rehabilitate stroke patients with a robotic glove. And he also finished his master thesis in industrial design and engineering at Delft University in the Netherlands. And in addition, he was also the managing director of a startup consultancy firm. Next, we have Serdal Yurder on our end here. He is the business development manager at Manus VR. So Manus has gloves that allow for precise finger-hand tracking. In addition, the gloves can integrate with a variety of different environments such as OptiTrack and more. And they also have another line of gloves that involve tracking and haptics for VR headsets. Awesome. And finally, we have Ashley Huffman, who is co-founder and head of marketing and strategic partnerships at Titan Haptics. And so she leads relations in XR, gaming, and wearables. So Titan Haptics has advanced motor technology that can be used in smartphones, controllers used in gaming, and other XR devices. And in addition, I think, so Gijs and Ashley are co-founders or co-leaders of the Haptics Club, and I think they're repping it today, which is an awesome podcast that is on Spotify. I've listened to a couple of episodes and they're fantastic, so please listen. So it's a podcast created by industry leaders that support education, cooperation, and inclusion of the haptics field. So without further ado, is there anything else the panelists would like to add to the intros?
Thanks for the intro. It's wonderful.
Yeah, awesome. Great to have you guys today. So just want to get a feel of the room. How many in here knows about haptics? Just raise a hand. Okay, that's a good amount of people. Awesome. How many people have tried haptics, either here or outside of the conference? Oh, awesome. Great, so maybe we can skip the what is haptics question. Great, okay, so we can get right into the meat of it. So a lot of buzz around haptics, even in the talks at AWE today. I know there's talks, I think, about a speaker or sneakers that could deliver haptics to your foot, which is incredible. So just wanted to ask, so there's a lot of buzz around VR and haptics, but what are the main differences between haptics for VR versus AR in your opinion? And maybe we can start off with Ashley, since Titan Haptics does a lot of work with smartphones.
Yeah, sure. So I'd say the biggest difference between the use of haptics in AR and VR is the type of experience that you're trying to create. So in VR, typically someone's all immersively, they're in a space, you're trying to replicate some kind of experience, and you really need to think about what the ground feels like, what things they're touching feel like, what the weaponry or the controllers feel like. And so there's a lot of different elements to that. Whereas with AR, a lot of the thing you're trying to solve has to do with like interfaces and like what do the buttons kind of feel like? What are the things that you're really interacting with? What do those look like, feel like? So it's less about everything and it's more about iron focusing so that the person can really be engaged. So I'd say that's the biggest difference.
Awesome.
I think that is limited to the current status of AR, but if we're moving towards more H&D likes, I think the challenges for haptics are a lot broader than that, because currently in VR, especially with having haptic gloves, so force feedback and vibrotactile feedback gloves, or even beyond that, you can get away with like an accuracy that is not 100% spot on. If your virtual hand is just mimicking a little bit what you're doing, it's already good enough. But in AR, if there's a mismatch between, for instance, the moment of collision of a virtual object and your real hand, you're really breaking that immersion. So especially when we're moving towards AMD AR haptics, then the fidelity should increase. And luckily, VR is now is like the main area of where haptics is deployed. But it's to us as the industry to move along with that precision to also support HMD haptics for AR.
Yeah, completely agree. I feel that if you want true immersion, especially in virtual reality, the senses that you experience virtual reality with are mainly like vision and sound, of course. And haptic provides you that extra sense, which can be so powerful for the experience and true immersion, because that's what we're working towards. And with AR, you already see everything around you at the level of your maximum capacity of your human body. Comparing the value of haptic in an AR environment is so much more challenging because it has to be perfect, as guys just mentioned. And to get to that point is a very big challenge for us as developers and also the market.
And something I think also really interesting midway there is something like what we call at Sense Club mixed reality haptics. So having dummy props, which can be just 3D printed objects, and enhance that with like vibrotactile or force feedback. In that sense, you still can rely on the real world like physicality of a prop, but have the additional of haptics. And a super interesting example of that is just having a dummy puppet and the heartbeat for like AED training, for instance, comes from the gloves that you're wearing. And in that sense, we combine that with HoloLens, and we don't have actually finger tracking on that, but it's just the vibrations and the force feedback that come from the gloves and when you're touching the puppet. And so you just have to have a dummy object and then enhance that with haptics. And I think that's also a nice middle way of moving from VR to AR.
That's really great. And just kind of riffing off of that, so in terms of the main differences, I know that you were saying, Heis, that there's a big issue of colliding the real world object and also the latency, like breaking out of immersion. Do you find that maybe the use cases are completely different for VR versus AR, or are there things that you've seen that could pop up for differences?
I think the use cases are quite similar for VR and AR. But in AR, especially like the use cases we're working now on with AR are more on the design evaluation or multi-user interactions, which in VR it's mostly on training and single usage. So those are the differences, but the ground of the use cases are quite similar.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Great. And then in a different vein, also the design of the tech, I would love to ask, are there major differences that you'll see in terms of VR and AR haptics, in terms of the design, the feel of the tech for users, any things that strike you guys?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously for AR, you also have the visual of the product itself. So design really matters in AR where, well, maybe you have seen our previous product, like a big blue exoskeleton. I wouldn't advise you to use that in AR because it's just, wouldn't say it's ugly, but it's not that nice to have there. And you totally forget about it when you're in VR, but in AR, yeah, you just want to have a product that also is appealing to you as a customer.
Yeah, and I believe that the gloves that you're wearing in this case that we're talking about, they actually have to feel as if it's your own skin, right? That's such an important aspect of being immersed with this technology. And that's the key word that we have actually when you're in AR or VR, that immersion is so important. And as he mentioned, like we also had the same issues with designing the gloves, that as soon as you're visually seeing what the gloves look like and you are in VR or AR, then the experience becomes so much less stronger than that it can be. It's essential for a haptic developing company to have a big team also focused on the product design itself, and how can we minimize how much space of your hand these gloves or any other tech takes. That's a big challenge.
And the challenge there is always the wearability versus the accuracy. So you can make something that's super accurate, but that weighs 50 kilograms, and it's super heavy and it's super big, but it's very precise. But you don't want to have been restricted by the wearability of it. So
Yeah.
I think that is really the trade-off as companies that we have to take.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to like merge the different worlds of understanding user experience. So whether it's like a wearable mixed with hand tracking that's as good as you can get it, and then audio is like another part of that. So if you can kind of get the trifecta, then you've got a really good experience that kind of balances exactly what Hans was saying.
And I think that's also, to the audience, the question that you need to ask yourself when implementing haptics. So what is the ease of use that I want, and what is the fidelity that I want? And you need to find like a cross point where that fits your solution, your application. Because you can have super high fidelity haptics, which is not wearable at all, or you can have very wearable haptics, but the fidelity is a little bit limited. So you need to find where the technology is at in order to start choosing the right devices for your application.
Yeah, and the second thing that also comes together with this topic is you can have this beautiful design that works perfectly and has nice fidelity that's good enough for the use case of your clients. But is it actually producible? That's the next big topic, and that's the next big challenge, because now we have looked at the aspect of making accurate tracking, making accurate haptics, but how as a company will you be able to make this also a producible product on a larger scale?
Yes, scale the haptics within your organization. That has to do with obviously the availability of the haptic prop you're choosing, but also on the distribution of the training or the creation that you have been making throughout the whole company that you're actually implemented into.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. And just trying to kind of stay on this topic, super interesting. So I know there are a lot of challenges kind of involving the design of haptics. Do you have any advice for people in terms of like, measuring the value of haptics, right? Integrating into people's products and communicating the benefits. Do you have any advice for the audience here?
Haptics is, like they say with hardware, haptics is hard just because there are not a lot of haptics experts out there. And so there's a lot of like upfront learning that I think a lot of companies are faced with that makes it really difficult just to get started if you haven't already. So, but there are a lot of like interesting talks and tools, like Haptic Labs is one of them, where it's just like an easy way to get onboarded with haptics design. So you don't have to like dive into like, 1,000-page research papers, which, I don't know if you want to do that on your spare time, but I surely don't. And then in terms of like on the integration side, it's a matter of finding what you're trying to solve, what you need to do, and look to see what existing technologies there are and how you can like kind of best utilize them, and kind of lean on the shoulders of giants in terms of people that have already created experiences. And I think for selling it internally, I think you can't not look at like Sony and Nintendo as like companies that have taken haptics and really made it into something really special that everyone knows about because of them. So I think if you can understand the value of the types of like ads and games and just things that they've done in that space, like the value is quite obvious, but it's a matter of, I think internally, like balancing that time that you can spend. So like I said, standing on the shoulders of giants, reaching out to people who can like answer your questions and help you. Like I know even talking with Heis, it's like if I ask a question and he can't solve it, has nothing to do with his company, like he is like helpful and will, lead me in the right direction. So I think it's really important that you just ask in many cases.
And also keep in mind the actual goal that you want to achieve with the haptic product. So training is a big use case for haptics, and in training, but also in like design evaluation, two metrics are super important. The first one is the perceived realism of your participant. So, what is the perceived realism that a user has while having haptics, either with Manus gloves or with Sense gloves or with Haptics gloves, and what is the fidelity that you want to have with that? That's a question you need to first ask your like end users. And then secondly is what is the actual goal of your training that you want to build? Is that to prevent mistakes in a real life situation, for instance? well, then that is your metrics to benchmark your haptics against. So say, okay, I want to decrease X amount of mistakes made by training. And we've done a ton of research at Sense Glove that using haptic gloves prevent, especially more dexterous cases, people from making mistakes compared to training with controllers or compared to training with only motion capturing gloves or motion capturing like Oculus hand tracking. So really adding haptics to your products or to your training prevents people making like learning errors. A very good example is from a training that we've made for the Dutch Army, where they realized that the people who were trained by controllers, they needed to replace like a fuse, and the interaction with the controller was pulling the trigger of the controller. So the people remembered pulling when replacing the fuse, but the actual interaction was pushing, turning, and then getting it out. But the ones who were trained with controllers remembered pulling, just pulled it out, and they broke the whole fuse box. So yeah, that's not the interaction that you want if you're training people. So that's the reason why they come to us and say, hey, we need to have haptics. And then, you're actually grabbing things with a Sense Glove, feel the force feedback inside your hand, you need to turn it, and then you feel the vibrational patterns, and then you take it out. And that's the level of realism you want to have for training. So that's what you need to ask yourself. What fidelity do I need, and what type of learning do I need to create?
Yeah, that's a great point that Gijs is just making. When you do want to implement technology that has these type of things like the haptic technologies, for example, you shouldn't focus on adding this to your solution just because it's haptics. You shouldn't just do a checkbox like, oh, now I have haptics inside of my solution. You should really think like, okay, what's the goal that I'm going for, and which of these solutions is the best tool that empowers me reaching this goal. So as Gijs has mentioned, that the force feedback that Sense Glove, for example, provides is so unique, combined with like the untethered headsets. It's an environment that can really easily scale up training for your team, and you can have muscle memory training. But do you want to go for something that actually provides very precise finger tracking or extremely precise haptic feedback with a lot of sensors on top of every part of your hand? Then you have to find the solution that empowers that goal that you're going towards. And that's something we shouldn't forget. And we shouldn't go for the checkbox that doesn't stimulate the market that we're in, and it doesn't empower us at all.
Yeah, no, this is really great insights here. Just wanted to ask, so I know you mentioned training, Gijs, but are there any other instances where haptics might be vital to a certain experience, and not just like, I think someone said in a panel yesterday, like a sprinkle on top, like a little seasoning, right, the meal. But any other use cases from anyone that is particularly vital?
Yeah, so basically the whole VR enterprise chain from design evaluation to training is where haptics adds value, because it's just, again, the addition of the perceived realism that haptics can bring. And if you want to assess a design in an early phase, you don't want to create a physical prototype, haptics is a very good way to emphasize on whether I can interact with a particular new car design that I have. Does the button feel right? Or do I need to make another button click? It's a nice tool to quickly iterate. And then, especially when you're designing, for instance, your manufacturing process, you can learn ergonomic analysis on the speed of manufacturing, and obviously that same environment can then be used to actually train your employees when you find the right configuration. So that whole chain of enterprise from design to training is where haptics adds a lot of sense. And obviously moving also towards the future and towards like more standardized interaction in H&D AR, let's say that way. You also want to have more richer interaction. So like if you want to shake someone's hand, if you want to high five someone, you really want to have some form of haptic feedback rather than just only making gestures. So that's a little bit of the scala where we're looking at when designing haptics.
Yeah. When I first got into virtual reality myself, something that I noticed is that when I'm using controllers or finger tracking solutions, doesn't really matter what, when I'm in VR, my perception of depth, for example, can be very challenging, right? And then when you have those haptic feedback modules on your hand or any other part of your body that you're using in that case, and you're trying to reach out to something, and you know with the feedback, like, hey, I'm touching something, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be something extremely realistic that you're feeling the surface or anything, but just that you know a trigger point for your brain, like, okay, this is me touching that instead of just with your visual sight. I think that can really empower such a bigger experience, and it can be so useful for a lot of people that are developing software and training. It's something valuable to consider.
Yeah, and even beyond that, you can also use haptics to augment your completion, for instance. So something that we always encourage our users to do is a task completion haptic. So once, still again on the use case of training, when you completed a task successfully, a small buzz of your vibromotor that helps you to understand, okay, I did this right. That's super powerful. And that's beyond things you can do in real life, because in real life you don't have a task completion buzz.
Yeah, I think it's big on the just engaging with an interface side. That's what we're seeing a lot of. Like, I'm in the gaming space, so that's really where you have a lot of haptics for creating like enchanting moments and replicating things like weaponry or sword play or things like that. But in terms of like being able to really engage with a screen and know whether you've pressed a button or you are hovering over a button, like those kind of things are really important, because when you have, especially just like a hands-free experience, you sometimes don't know, and there's like slight delays. And it's those kind of things that really break an experience. So if you can incorporate haptics in some way, whether it's like an alert system or just something, those just create like a seamless way for a customer to be able to like feel like it's intuitive and it's natural. And yeah, that's a really important part of it, besides having fun.
Yeah, and I think that's also the whole point of haptics. It shouldn't be the sprinkle on top. You should notice it, actually.
Yeah.
So the best haptics is the haptics that you don't notice.
Yeah.
So sometimes I make a joke like, I don't feel anything. That's the best reaction you can get, because then it's as realistic that it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels natural.
It feels natural.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Also in a space where it's so new, interactions are just beginning to come about, and just to know how to interact with things, I think haptics will play a key role. That's really great. Wanted to ask, so I know there's a lot in the field about VR and haptics. Why do you think AR haptics hasn't been talked about as much? And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Ooh, so from my experience, it's a hard topic, of course. The thing is, like, with our equipment, for example, you need to make use of a tethered setup. Making use of a computer because of the processing power that you need in order to get the accuracy of finger tracking that we want to provide, and combine that with the haptic feedback that comes out of it eventually, like with the finger position. It has to be accurate when you're touching something, and the haptic that comes back. We exclusively work with tethered setups right now. And if you want to go to an AR setup, that's when the person is really immersed in the world that you're seeing already. And every part of blocking that immersion and blocking that natural feeling, such as cables and those type of limiting objects, can really challenge that experience. So I feel like you have to have a very complete product providing decent haptic in order to empower AR to the point that it's valuable inside of the setup. As we just mentioned, you don't want haptic feedback just because it should be there. You want it to be the tool on top of your body that feels natural and gives an extra sense to that experience. And it can be very, very valuable inside of AR, because in virtual reality, you're completely inside of a new environment and you're seeing whatever is inside of the software that you develop. But when you're going into AR and you have all the interactive screens that you see in front of you, and you want to interact with them, then we come back to that point that I said, like, you don't want to go past through all the things that you're pressing and interacting with.
Yeah.
And you want to know when you are actually interacting with all those objects that you see in front of you, the virtual objects.
I
So,
do,
yeah.
I do agree, but I'd also think it's just a matter of that we haven't gone to a point where it's an issue in AR. So in VR, we've solved pretty much all the issues around latency, around motion sickness, around accuracy, about portability, whatever. And now, next one up the buzzword is haptics, because you want to have better interaction. But in AR, there are so many things that needs to be solved first, like occlusion, like mapping of the environment around you, which are more pressing challenges in AR. So we haven't come to a point that we say, okay, 10 times doing blooming or 10 times pinching on the HoloLens is annoying. But it is annoying, but there are other problems that are more pressing. So we'll come there and say, okay, now remembering if you're wearing the HoloLens and 5 times pinching and you're still not getting it, you'll probably need some haptics.
Yeah, I think we're just starting to see companies kind of come out with peripherals and come up with ideas of how to kind of bridge that gap between you don't have controllers. We're also seeing companies trying to use haptics in the headset itself. So you can use haptics and like bone conduction to transfer sound. So there's like a lot of really cool stuff that people are working on, but we need to figure out the core technology first and then find ways to kind of build on top of it and have technology that people are willing to wear constantly. Like, I don't know anyone who wears 2 watches, but that may be kind of what it takes to have, a true augmented reality experience, but maybe they'll come up with something else. But fingertip, there's a lot of options, but there's a lot of stuff in the works.
Yeah, and especially like to inspire you, also check out the work that Facebook Reality Labs, Meta Reality, whatever, is doing. It's called the TASP project, which is a wristband that squeezes a little bit of your lower arm. And those are also like non-intrusive, interactable haptic devices that can really add to, for instance, AR experiences.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Just wanted to ask, any other cool, like, futuristic AR haptics that you've seen?
There's a lot of stuff in academia that's really strange, I would say, like really, really next level stuff. Recently on the Haptics Club, we had a team from the University of Chicago, and they had a wristband that it's using chemical haptics. And so you can imagine, you can put a whole bunch of different types of materials inside of there, chemicals that do different things to your skin. It makes it cool, makes it hot, makes it tingle, makes it painful. So I think there's a lot of potential, but that's like pretty future forward stuff. That one's liability issues in terms of, mixing chemicals and putting them on the human body. But there are just a lot of people in that space coming up with crazy ideas. So if you look into academia and you want to see some like future forward stuff, that's really where you're going to want to look.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we have tons of examples from academia on indeed the Haptics Club. So listen to our podcast a bit, and you'll get good inspiration of the future of haptics
Crazy
for AR.
stuff,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Very, very cool. And just kind of going off of that, I know AR haptics is very early stage. As you said, there's lots of things we need to fix about AR first before we can even tackle haptics. But do you know if there are any like other industries that we can learn from in terms of like, maybe this could be the next wave of how AR haptics is going to go? Do you see any trends here?
Yeah, obviously there are industries you can piggyback on more in terms of business development. So, for instance, you see now eye tracking being picked up in the AR space. So those are technologies where we, as like haptics community, can learn and see, okay, where are the mistakes, especially in business-wise, that they've made, and how can we overcome to make those mistakes? So, that makes it easier for us, and it's also a way for the industry to find out what is the best interactable in AR. Do we want to have like a panel that gives us sound haptics coming from that panel, or do we want to have wearables? What are the actual use cases for AR beyond like the usual enterprise ones? What is the spatial display of the future? Those types of questions, we also need to find out and to create like the mouse and keyboard of the future wave computing. So what is the form factor of that mouse and keyboard? Is that a glove? Is that a sound wave panel? Is that only vibration? Is that force feedback? Is that thermal feedback? Is that think of all the possibilities that are out there. So it's still figuring out what's the mouse and the keyboard of the future wave computing.
I think the one funny thing about the haptics industry, if you look at other successful fields, like even going back to like radio or just music, what really worked well with them is they had content, which made people want to buy the hardware. Whereas with haptics, you're kind of like, you have haptics in almost all your devices, but the kind of content that you can feel is still rather like limited. So it's kind of like a strange chicken and the egg. It's like there's a lack of content, but there's a lot of really cool technologies. So I think if we can see more haptics content and we're able to kind of come together and help companies create cool content, like enable them without having to read research papers or to learn how new technologies work or to have to like fight through different types of websites to figure out what kind of technologies actually exist. I think it'll be a lot easier for people to just create cool stuff. And I think we could probably all agree that content is really the really key part about haptics. Like if you don't have content, like the technology doesn't really matter. So I think that's like super critical. And there's obviously like standards coming into play, like through the Haptics Industry Forum, where they're trying to like create a benchmark of like what is a good haptics experience. That way, it's kind of a level playing field for people who come into the industry. You can don't have to learn as much. You can have an understanding of what you need to do in order to kind of be like kind of like a stereotypical great experience, and then you build upon that, which is really cool.
And also with standards coming in, it's way easier for creators to build content that is interchangeable between products. So as we're creating, indeed, with the Haptics Industry Forum now a standard for XR haptics, you'll be able to create an experience that both work for the Sense Glove as for a Manus Glove.
Yeah.
And in that sense, you don't have to do things twice like you've previously needed to do with, if you want to create something for Oculus, it didn't work on HTC, now there is a standard. That's also what we're driving to have that in the haptics field. So everything that works for an Oculus Quest controller should also work for a Sense Glove, should also work for a Manus, and should even work for a Haptics super high fidelity haptic glove. So that's what we're trying to do with the Haptic Industry Forum, just to create a API level of what haptics is.
Yeah, so you don't have to fork your work and develop for each one, which is like an added amount of work that as a company, like you probably don't want to spend your time trying to determine which area you should go into or have different developers for different things. So yeah, I think that's going to be really big for content.
And hopefully that also allows us to have developers that can create content faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then we're solving the content problem as well.
Yeah, yep.
Awesome. Also going off of that, I know you said there's a lot of work being done to standardize the haptics field. I think that's amazing. I think one of the questions I have, just as a student myself, so it seems like a lot of haptics are quite expensive. Do you have any, I guess, like advice for someone who's really interested in haptics but don't know how to like get involved with the high barriers to entry?
Haptics isn't expensive. You can buy a Gen-Long ERM for 2 cents. So it's not expensive. It's the way the integration and the integration into the products and the skill of the product that haptics is being created in that makes it expensive. There is a super cool YouTuber called Lucas VR that built a force feedback glove for components that cost $23.
Wow.
So haptics isn't expensive. It's just the integration of it and the scale of which it's deployed at the moment that makes it expensive.
Right.
Yeah, the price, the expensive price that we're talking about is also like the investment of the market into like the development of the product, right? So when we're developing products, we need the funding or the people that we're working with in order to develop this technology even further. And that's why the price can be higher. But that's an investment that has to be made in order to grow together as a sector, in my opinion.
It's again also, do I want to have a finished product that I can just buy, whereas an extensive SDK where I can create a experience within a week and spend like a week on creating the experience and $5,000 on the glove, or do I want to have a $23 glove, build it myself, homemade, code any interaction into an experience and like be 2 months to build the similar experience. So haptics itself isn't expensive, it's just the creation part of it. And hopefully when more content comes, when haptics is more widespread to the field of AR and VR, we'll see also prices dropping. So in hardware manufacturing, there's a rule of thumb. if you go 10 times, if you sell 10 times more, the price will drop with 50%. So, as you know, companies like SenseGlove and Manis are creating like selling hundreds of gloves a year.
Yeah.
Price point is now like
Oh,
2,500 to 5,000 euros or dollars. Well, imagine that Oculus is selling hundreds of thousands of units. You can see what haptic gloves in this case will cost when we're at that scale. Then really becomes as expensive as the Oculus Quest.
Yeah, you can go more expensive to differentiate, but you don't necessarily have to. I think that's what the kind of cool part is, if you just know what you're trying to solve for. And you can create a different experience based on whatever that is, whether it's using air pumps or like magnetic RAM types or linear actuators. There's a lot of opportunity to just kind of explore and express. So yeah, it definitely doesn't need to be expensive, 100%. And definitely check out Lucas, because that's a really cool project. It's crazy. Yeah.
The project, I think, Lucid VR.
Yeah, Lucid VR, yeah.
Very cool, very cool. We'll have to check that out. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing. Awesome. So just wanted to kind of go a different direction on maybe like super futuristic thinking. Like, what is your pie in the sky vision for AR haptics? Like, what do you think the world could look like with this haptic integration?
I believe that haptic, like we should dare to go further into haptics instead of just having the sense of touching something. But we should try to make the technology actually communicate with our body on a more nerve level of communicating with your body. So can we actually get the haptic input in a deeper way inside of your body? As in, can we communicate with the muscles, not by pulling them or keeping them from moving, but actually inputting the neural feedback? That's a very interesting topic that I'm curious about and what will happen in the future. We do see a lot of things like that can go into your head, for example, like those type of
Deep brain
technology.
stimulation.
Yeah. Those type of things are coming, so I'm looking forward to the future and actually infusing with this tool and being able to feel, touch, and experience things on a more immersive and heavier level.
I'm coming from a background where I designed rehabilitation devices. I'm not a fan of neural input.
I can imagine.
Because there's just like a barrier for people to, especially for healthy people, to have some neural input.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the future of haptics lies in neural interfaces for healthy people, to say it that way. It is a super good tool for rehabilitation. But for healthy people, I don't see a future there. What I do see is it become a like high fidelity mouse and keyboard of the future. So if like AR becomes our main way of computing, if it will replace our smartphones, if it will replace our laptops, then we need to have some form of better interaction than only gestures. Gestures might be good for 50% of our interactions. But as soon as you want to have a little bit more high fidelity interaction, you want to have a form of haptics. Don't know what form factor that will be, but that is something that you will wear in your pocket, and that has to have the highest fidelity that fit into your pocket. Let's say it that way. That's where I see the future of haptics. The most fidelity, so that can be in temperature, that can be in deforming of your skin, so you actually can feel edges. That can be in force feedback, so you can feel the shape and size of and density of an object. So all those types of haptics can be combined in one product that fit in your pocket. I think that is the future of haptics in AR.
Yeah, I love that so much. Definitely agree with that. I think for me, as someone who's into like the gaming experience space, I would say one of the things that for me is going to be kind of critical and super interesting for the future is just like wearable haptics. I think where a lot of people kind of poo-poo at the idea of like, oh, I don't want to wear a haptic suit, or I'm not ready for a haptic suit. But if you think it's like, do you wear pants? Okay, so they can actually put haptics in like regular pants. Like, do you wear a shirt on a regular basis or a jacket? So I think there's a lot of ways that we can integrate human connection and the environment with haptics to make it just a fully immersive experience, including like the textures, and then including things like smells. So it's like you can be in a different place and experience it without actually having to be there. So that to me is like one of the most exciting things. It's kind of like on like more of the kind of crazier side of haptics, but I totally agree. There's going to be like a one solution that fits them all, but at the same time, I think there's going to be people that want to experience the world and feel things around them and be able to like interact with someone across the world with a hug or a punch or a kick, depending on what you're playing.
That's crazy. So you're imagining just kind of like an integration into your day, just like putting on some pants and just...
Yeah, or it's just what you wear and it just happens to have haptics inside of it.
Wow, it's very exciting. Awesome. And I guess we talked about learning, and I guess anything else that you would like to recommend people just thinking about haptics, like even just right now, like if you could recommend anything for the people to do, just maybe at AWE or anything today.
I can
any
recommend
last
listening to the
notes?
Haptics Club.
Thanks for that.
You're going to get a
T-shirts are
t-shirt. Yeah,
fantastic.
we're going to get a t-shirt.
No, and try the different products, different
Yeah.
haptic products that are out there. So there's Haptics, super high fidelity glove that gives you also feedback, like skin deformation feedback in the palm of your hand, so you can actually feel more than density and size. You can actually feel shapes of objects. Then there's Haptics out there, which is a affordable, fast for gaming. So there's a vibration. There are all sorts of vibration motors, so you can walk through a rainforest and feel the rain on your body. I think they also have shooter games where you can feel you've been shot.
Yep.
And obviously try out the Sense gloves for especially training, immersive training. So that gives you a force and vibrotactile feedback, forcing you to have an interaction that is similar as a real live interaction. So those three products you definitely need to check out.
Yeah, and I think like from our perspective as like Titan Haptics, a component manufacturer, like it's in our best interest to like help you put our technology into your product. So like just reach out to a company and talk to them and ask and tell them what you're trying to solve, and they can help you like literally integrate and help create experiences and give you ideas of like other ways that you can do it. So it's like just reach out and ask questions and just don't feel like you're on your own. You have to buy a single component and figure it out on the fly, which is fun for many people, but not when you're trying to run a company and you've got many things to solve. So I think, yeah, just reach out to companies like Titan Haptics and just ask questions, and there are no silly questions ever.
Great.
And if precise finger tracking is a thing that you're looking for, I can help you with that too. Yeah, and I would advise you to try out the Sense gloves. They are actually exhibiting here, so don't forget that.
Yeah, super cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the presentation came on a little late, but maybe we can kind of go through it. So this is Titan Haptics. This is the motor. And then I believe, maybe if I go back, maybe you finish. But I think we also displayed Manus, and
Yeah.
hope we'll get Sense Glove back on there. But they're also in the booth, so
We're
come
also-
check it out
Yeah.
for real.
Real life, yeah.
Okay, let's go back to, let's see. And yep, Sense Glove. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. I think we're going to take some questions now, so please feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, guys. And let's give a round of applause, please. Thank you. Great job. Thank you for the conversation.
Hi, so many questions. I'll try to condense it down to one. What's that? Yeah, number one, line 163 is, no.
Oh, man.
So yeah, you answered a bunch of them already, actually. But I'm curious, as an engineer, what are there software tools that I can use to help design specific kinds of feelings or textures or touch? Or do I need machine learning algorithms to like pair and like create a particular kind of experience from a piece of haptics? And then the follow-up question to that is, you mentioned that there was a task completion buzz or failure. I was wondering if you had any recommendations on like failure modes. That's kind of a joke, but you know, shock, etc. But like, yeah, mostly what tools would I use to create these kinds of experience? Also, I'm interested in low-level components that I could use to experiment with, like at the low level. So if you could throw out a bunch of like part numbers or something, that would be cool. Thanks.
Yep. I can start off with that. Yeah, so first, all of the devices will have their own APIs. So for Unity, for Unreal, you can make it as easy to just drag and drop a existing material layer towards creating your own waveforms for vibrotactile. So you have the SDKs. You also have a program from a French company called Haptics, which make you, give you a level deeper into the usual level of the SDKs. So you can really draw your own waveforms. You can really draw your own contact physics for force feedback, for instance. So that's a super good tool to use. And more on lower level side, I think most of the APIs, I'm not sure about the Manus API, but actually the SenseGlove API gives you access to really at the lower level steering of the motors inside there. Something that's super cool, what you need to check out is audio or sound to haptics, where you just record a sound file from, for instance, a drill or for a slider button, and throughout, for instance, the Haptics SDK, you can make that into a vibrotactile waveform. That's a super easy way to create really convenient haptics, because you just record the thing, you have an AI that translates that into a haptic sound, into a haptic waveform, and it plays also on, for instance, the Tidal motors that you have.
That's a Foley artist's daydream, because you just like think of a crazy sound that you want to create, and you can pump it through to haptics, which is cool. So yeah, Haptics has a good tool. There are quite a few others. Low-Felt has one as well that are really designed to be like plug and play, like super. It's like the kind of like a Photoshop of haptics design. So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out those to see what kind of fits with your Jive. You can get more technical and code directly, but for a lot of people, they just want to like have toggles that they can switch and flip around, or textures that they can pull up as part of a library.
So, I'm sorry, is that a tool that comes with the SDK or is independent?
Those two are like independent tools that you can use if you want. There's Haptics has a tool, and there's also Low-Felt has their own tool. I don't know what the actual name of the tool is called, but if you look up Low-Felt, you'll find their tool. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Wiley with MIT Reality Hack. One of the things we've noticed running our event is that whenever we present hackers with some new input-output modality, they come up with ideas that we would just have never imagined, ways of manipulating people's perception, ways of driving new forms of interaction. So I'm kind of curious, what are some of the most unexpected ways you've seen people use haptics? And are there directions in the design space that companies might not explore, but our community of hackers might?
Yeah, one use case where people use SenseGlove for is, what I really love is done by Procter & Gamble. And they wanted to create the experience how it is to have Parkinson. So they used our gloves to, you put on the gloves, you do a super kind of kitchen environment. You need to pour milk into a bottle or whatever and such. And then you do that first time just with the right haptics. But then they create pulling on the finger, they get vibrations, there's also a little bit of tickling in there. And that actually lets you experience how it is to have Parkinson. So those types of experiences are super amazing, where we never thought of that our product would be used for, but are so immersive and so empathy creating of people who are suffering from that disease.
Yeah, sadly, all the creative projects that we work with are heavily on NDA. So there's nothing that I can share with the creative usage of the gloves. But this, what Gijs just mentioned, is something I also saw on LinkedIn, actually. And that's one of the most creative ways of using a haptic glove, in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah, for our motors, it's an impact motor. So there's I've seen people do some crazy stuff with replicating, it was like putting a heartbeat into a pumpkin so that you could feel it. Which is creepy and cool at the same time. Creating music out of haptics, so rather than it being a physical thing, it was more audible, which was kind of mind-blowing. Also stuff locked under NDA that I wish I could talk about similarly. But yeah, it's funny, going to a hackathon, I meet the coolest people and they have the craziest ideas that we never ever thought about. And so I would love to talk with you 100%. Love what you guys are doing. That'd be super cool.
Maybe in the last hackathon we organized, our gloves were playing the Star Wars theme.
Hey. Very cool.
Okay, any other questions from our panelists? Any last thoughts?
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.